Everyone, and thanks so much for joining. I'm Christy Setzer. I'm the president of New Heights Communications, and I'd like to welcome you to our call. As you know, next week, Congress is scheduled to go into their August recess, and they have yet to pass critical voting rights protections as laid out in the For the People Act. One of those reasons, of course, is the filibuster. Today, we'll hear from national faith leaders demanding that the Senate not let the filibuster stand in the way of voting rights for all Americans. We'll hear from our speakers and then address any questions that you might have. So if you do have questions, you can add them as a comment to YouTube. Joining us today is Reverend Jennifer Butler, the CEO of Faith and Public Life Action, Reverend Dr. Leslie Copeland-Toon, the Chief Operating Officer of the National Council of Churches USA, Sister Quincy Howard, Government Relations Advocate for the Network Lobby for Catholic Social Justice, Rabbi Jason Kimmelman-Block, Washington Director of Bend the Ark, Jewish Action, Reverend Terrence McKinley, Director of Racial Justice Mobilizing for Sojourners, and Johanna Mustafa, Policy and Advocacy Manager for Polygon Education Fund. Thanks so much to all of you. And with that, I will turn it over to Reverend Butler. Jen?
Thank you so much, Christy, and hello, everyone. I'm the Reverend Jennifer Butler, the CEO of Faith and Public Life Action. We are a network of 50,000 religious leaders making this nation a land of dignity and justice for all. Because every person is created in God's image, every person deserves to live in dignity and to flourish. And because God tells us to love our neighbors as ourselves, we seek public policies and sacred freedoms that bring dignity and flourishing to all of us. That's why voting and democracy are moral issues for the faith community. Our country faces a pivotal moment. The moral direction of our country is at stake. Our freedom to thrive, to pass policies that protect our health care, that help us put bread on the table, that ensure we have roofs over our head, that protect our climate and create good jobs. All of this depends on our freedom to choose our leaders. That freedom used to rest on the solid foundation of the Voting Rights Act, which a Black-led multi-faith coalition marched and bled for. But now our sacred rights are at grave risk. This year, 17 Republican-controlled legislatures have put up barriers to voting that target Black, Brown, Native, and Asian communities. The only way to protect our democracy from death by 1,000 cuts is for the Senate to pass the For the People Act. And passing the For the People Act requires setting aside the filibuster. The freedom to thrive rests on the freedom to vote. And freedom to vote rests on doing away with political loopholes that hold progress hostage to a minority of people with an immoral agenda. Republican senators have cast their lot with the Jim Crow faction that has fought racial equality since this nation's founding. And they are using the filibuster to carry on that work today. The Jim Crow faction filibustered anti-lynching laws and civil rights. They filibustered as many of the first Black presidents' highly popular policies as they possibly could. They are filibustering the freedom of voters of color to vote today. Jesus said that a tree will be known by its fruit, and the fruit of the filibuster is racism and death. That is why Faith and Public Life has collected signatures from over 1,500 faith communities calling for Congress to protect our freedom to choose our leaders by dispensing with the filibuster and passing the For the People Act. So today, on their behalf, I call on Democratic leaders from Senator Joe Manchin to President Joe Biden to listen to Mordecai's words to Queen Esther. Perhaps you have come into the kingdom for such a time as this. Such a time as this calls for more moral courage and the wisdom to put our freedom before bipartisan backslapping. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Butler. And now we'll hear from Reverend Dr. Leslie Copeland-Toon.
Good afternoon. It's so great to be with all of you and to be with friends talking about this really important issue in our nation. I echo what my sister and friend, Reverend Butler, has already said in many ways. And we think alike. We've been out in the streets together. So it's no wonder that I'm in her amen corner even right now. This is an important moment for our nation, and I would say also for people of faith to be able to stand up and to speak out about the importance of passing the For the People Act and ending the filibuster. It is really an inflection point in history and a turning point for our democracy. We have to decide what kind of nation we are going to be. We have been purporting our belief in democracy since the founding of our country. We have been going around the world, in fact, talking about how great democracy is and how every nation should be democratic countries as well. One person, one vote, free and fair elections. Yet these days, it's as if many states across our country, the message is very clearly do as we say and not as we do. I'm reminded of Jesus' stunning rebuke of the Pharisees in Matthew 23, chapter 23, verse 3. Therefore, do whatever they teach you and follow it, but do not do as they do, for they do not practice what they teach. In a democracy, voting is a way to reaffirm the dignity of all of God's people and to recognize that we are all created in God's image. By denying or suppressing the vote in a democracy, which has at its core and central to participation in how our governments will run and how the kinds of laws and policies that will govern us, is voting. So to deny or suppress the vote is to deny the inherent dignity and the very image of God in God's people. In other words, it is immoral, it is a sin, and it is a shame. We can do better than this. We need to be better than this. That is why it's up to the Senate. It is time to end the filibuster with its racist history and to pass the For the People Act. Now, I can say I do understand the argument by those not wanting to end the filibuster, but I can't help but wonder if they understand what's at stake. I can't help but wonder if they know its racist history and that by holding on to it, they are also upholding white supremacy and one of the worst vestiges of our nation's history that we are still trying to undo today. I can't help but wonder if they are so committed to the filibuster that they are willing to preserve white supremacy and end democracy in America. Are they really willing to cut off their noses, or really our noses, to spite our face? I certainly hope not, and I have a hard time accepting that they will let this end our democracy as we know it. It is time for the Senate to be just as courageous as those people who stood in lines in Georgia and Arizona and Michigan and Wisconsin in the 2020 election to cast their ballots and to exercise their rights, their basic rights as Americans, as in being a part and being in this nation. It's time for them to be just as courageous as those people in the South who had water hoses turned on them and dogs sicked on them so that they could vote. Those who walked miles to get to the polls, those who sat in at lunch counters, those who risked terrorist activities by the Ku Klux Klan and similar groups who tried to intimidate them so that they wouldn't be able to vote or that they wouldn't exercise their right to vote. It is time for the Senate not to only praise John Lewis, but to be courageous just like he was. We urge the Senate to pass the For the People Act now and to end the filibuster. And to be certain, we will continue to push and to fight and to make our voices heard until the America that we call home, that we have been given stewardship over, truly lives up to its promise of being a democracy for all. Yes, we are tired, we are weary, We are, as Fannie Lou Hamer would say, sick and tired of being sick and tired. We feel like we're on some sort of habit trail that we are reliving this moment over and over again. But we're not just tired. We are also resilient and ready to do what has to be done to end voter suppression, to end white supremacy, to end racism and all its vestiges, and to make sure that all of God's people can have their voice heard through voting in our democracy. We can't stop and we won't stop. We really have come too far to turn back now, and we will continue until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. Pass the For the People Act now. Thank you, and God bless.
Thank you so much. We'll now hear from Sister Quincy Howard.
Thank you. It's so good to be here. And thank you, Leslie and Jen. So I am with the Network Lobby for Catholic Social Justice. We were founded by Catholic sisters, and for 50 years, we've advocated for federal policies that reflect social justice values rooted in our Catholic social teaching. We consider access to the ballot and meaningful participation in our democracy as a matter of dignity and key to Americans' ability to create a more just world for future generations. I'll address the filibuster rule because it is what is blocking passage of the For the People Act right now. For the People Act, a transformative democracy reform bill that would protect and strengthen our democratic systems in ways that are desperately needed. As a legislative tool, it has a fraught history of abuse that my sisters alluded to by senators in the minority to maintain white supremacy and to block civil rights and voting rights legislation that would advance the common good. So in principle, Network is calling for it to be eliminated based on its historical and current use as a tool of systemic racism. However, right now, we are calling on the Senate to do whatever is possible to create a pathway to passage for S1, the For the People Act. This is a time when our democracy must be prioritized. It is under a multi-pronged concerted attack, and we need actionable policy at the federal level to fight against it. Our priority at Network Lobby is an outcome where the rights of citizens to vote is protected and future generations can count on meaningful participation through our democratic systems. We need to see equal force from our Democratic senators and, frankly, from our president pushing back on these attacks. They must demonstrate a readiness to unite and push through what is necessary to preserve democracy for future generations. And it must happen before recess. Otherwise, the census data is released this month, and we will see another 10 years of extreme partisan gerrymandering. And for the first time, we'll see a redistricting process unfold without the full protections of the Voting Rights Act. There are many ways that creative minds can come up with, and there are many possibilities short of elimination that would offer a pathway to passage for S1. In the time that Network has been advocating, there have been more than 160 exemptions and changes to the filibuster rule in the Senate. If ever there was a time to bypass this rule, it is now. And we need President Biden to step up and use his power to encourage, support, and guide his colleagues in the Senate to do what's needed at this time. We should be talking about what's possible. The legacy of our nation is to make possible what others believed to be impossible. No one believed the Voting Rights Act of 1965 would pass until it did. The Holy Spirit is at work in the Senate as we speak, making all sorts of things possible. I, for one, hold on to my faith that senators and the president will recognize the moral call in this fight and will be inspired to push forward what is fully within their power and make the For the People Act the law of the land. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sister. And we'll now hear from Rabbi Jason Kimmelman-Block.
Thanks so much, and thanks to all my colleagues. It's great to be gathered together again. I am with Bend the Arc Jewish Action. We are a national group representing Jews of all denominations from across the spectrum. When we think about freedom of religion and freedom of speech and the ability of citizens to choose their leaders that make the key decisions that impact the well-being of their lives and their communities, these are values that are critical for this society to uphold if it's going to live up to its promise and if it's going to thrive. Those values are also why religious minorities, including the Jewish community, understand that our thriving and our safety is dependent on living in societies that value democracy and societies that honor the civil and human rights of all of its citizens. But we're currently experiencing the greatest threat to the right to vote and to free and fair elections since the end of Reconstruction. We have millions of Americans that refuse to accept election results. We have the former president and his allies who abandoned the sacred commitment that our country has to the peaceful transfer of power. And we have state after state that are passing laws that attempt to disenfranchise Black and brown voters in order to preserve a broken system that enshrines their own political power and wealth. These are attempts to make elections less accessible, less free, and less fair, and with some places even allowing legislatures to overturn the will of the voters if they don't like the result. These efforts must be stopped. And let's face it, we have politicians that, in order to hold on to power, have embarked on a strategy of minority rule. The filibuster and voter suppression laws are two sides of the same coin. The architects of the Constitution rightly worried about a tyranny of the majority, but the politicians behind these attacks on voting rights are trying to permanently enshrine a tyranny of the minority. Congress has the opportunity to restore the safeguards of our democracy with the For the People Act, to put power to select our leaders back in the hands of the people. The time is short, but we know it can be done. There simply must be the will to do it. And we're now at the point where senators must choose between democracy or the filibuster. Undemocratic procedural loopholes like the filibuster are part of the reason why so many people have lost faith that the government can actually solve their problems. For too long, the filibuster has been used as a tool to uphold segregation, to restrict the right to vote, to prevent wage increases, and stall other policy changes that our communities desperately need. The Senate should eliminate this Jim Crow era relic and pass the For the People Act as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now we'll hear from Reverend Terrence McKinley.
Thank you so much. My name is Reverend Terrence McKinley from Sojourners, and I am the senior pastor of Campbell AME Church in Washington, D.C. We recognize that this moment is critically important because our country is in danger of returning to an era when millions of American citizens were denied their personal freedom to vote and participate in democracy solely due to the color of their skin. What's happening now in our nation has the capacity to return us to an era before the times of Jim Crow. We know now that as of July, the Brennan Center has reported that there are over 400 bills with provisions that restrict voting access. They've been introduced in 49 states the first 7 months of the 2021 legislative sessions. We recognize as people of faith that this is not only an issue of democracy, but this is an issue of a theological issue. The right to vote is the most powerful tool a citizen has. It empowers them to have a seat at the table when decisions are made about their lives, allows them to choose who represents them at the table. And now we're facing a time where we need to uphold the federal standard to protect the unalienable right to vote for all from those who seek to limit the freedoms of millions of American friends, family members, neighbors, and colleagues. We know that we cannot sit back in silence, but we have to raise our voice, that passivity and reticence do not honor the legacy of those who've come before us, who have fought for the right to vote and have shed their blood for participation in this nation. As people of faith, we believe that because every person deserves the right to vote, every person is created in the Imago Dei, that we do a disservice when we do not stand and when we do not call on Congress to act, to stand up, to protect the right to vote, and to do what must be done with the filibuster. We believe that the right to vote actualizes divine imprint on all of us, that it is holy because it makes real the maxim that our vote is our voice. In other words, our vote vocalizes our humanity. And after 56 years after the Voting Rights Act of 1965, we must continue to preserve this holy right. I often talk about the fight for the right to vote in this nation, not as a marathon, as many have talked about it. Many say that it's not a sprint, but it truly is a relay race, where there are those who have fought for this in blood, sweat, and tears, and they have now passed it on to us to make certain that all are able to exercise the right to vote.
Thank you so much, Reverend Terrence. And finally, we will hear from Johanna Mustafa of Polygon.
Assalamu alaikum and peace be upon you. Thank you to our partners for organizing this very important call and all of you for sharing community space with us today. I am joining you on behalf of Polygon Education Fund. We are a nonpartisan organization that seeks to create an America where Muslims and all Americans feel empowered to make their voices heard in the halls of power. We believe that Americans should be equipped with the knowledge, tools, and access to participate in the democratic process. The blocking of For the People Act in the Senate last month was a disappointment and a testament to how detached some of our elected officials in Congress have come from the people they represent. At a time when draconian voter suppression laws continue to attack the people's right to vote and rule for the wealthiest few, proactive action on For the People Act in the Senate is the floor, not the ceiling for safeguarding our sacred voting rights. As we all know, the For the People Act would expand and protect voting rights for all, end partisan and racial gerrymandering, get dark money out of politics, and restore transparency and accountability in our government. It would dismantle the racist and systemic barriers intentionally built over decades to exclude Black, Brown, and Indigenous voices from fully participating in our democracy. As Muslims at Polygon and people of faith in this coalition space, we aim to fulfill civic duties out of a shared faithful mandate to engage in our political process and ensure the collective social good. For Muslims, we emphasize the responsibility of civil society to engage in the political process and of the state to ensure a representative process. It is seen as divine duty and is even considered on par with prayer and charity giving. And therefore, I am here today on behalf of Polygon as a Muslim leader and an ally to all impacted communities to echo the sentiments of our partners in this space and the urgency presented by speakers before me and call on our senators to center the needs of the most vulnerable constituents, particularly Black, Brown, Indigenous, and other marginalized Americans who will continue to be disenfranchised and silenced without For the People Act, especially in the upcoming elections. We reaffirm our unwavering support for voting rights and demand that procedural obstacles, including the Senate filibuster, do not stand in the way of protecting the freedom to vote for all Americans. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, quoted God as saying, "O my servants, I have forbidden injustice upon myself and have made it forbidden amongst you, so do not commit injustice." Voting rights and For the People Act is about justice. And this is why we strongly believe anything short of securing access to the ballot and protecting our sacred right to vote is a grave injustice. Americans impacted by housing insecurity, hunger, healthcare access, systemic racism and violence, and so much more tend to be the ones most disenfranchised in our election systems. Communities that live paycheck to paycheck are uniquely vulnerable and also tend to be the ones who are excluded and in many ways silenced in the democratic process. So clearly the stakes are very, very high. We owe it to our communities to defend their political and civic rights anywhere we can, and this includes at the ballot box. Every single American should have their voting rights protected, be able to participate and elect leaders who represent them, and work tirelessly towards bettering their lived experiences. And so I would like to end with an emphasis on the critical need for a democracy that upholds the dignity of every American. And while we do not dictate how Senate procedures should be reformed, we can confidently say that when political rules and processes, including the Senate filibuster, perpetuate the legacy of racism in our politics and halt the progress of full and robust debate, every attempt must be made to reform them, root out those obstacles, and ensure that progressive legislation upholding the most sacred of rights is protected and given a pathway for passage in our Congress. The vast majority of Americans support For the People Act and voting rights. So it's time for our senators to listen to the people. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shahana, and thank you to all of our speakers today. We'll pause for just a moment to see if there are any questions. Again, if you have any questions, you can put them in the comments section on YouTube. Okay, all right, seeing that, just want to thank everyone again, and thank you and have a good afternoon.